Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Melissa Mueller, and I am DWDC's Program Specialist. And I'm joined today by my colleagues Kelsey Goforth and Amanda Coventry-Barrage. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that while we are meeting virtually, the land Dying with Dignity Canada is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and we invite and encourage you to do your own research regarding the various treaties, in particular, the land in which you're on while we are meeting today. And I am thrilled to welcome you today to our first session of Your Healthcare Team. This is a series which aims to provide you with information on the roles and responsibilities of the care providers that make up your healthcare team. And today our session will focus on the role of funeral homes and their role in your end-of-life care and how they can reimagine the process of navigating need. And so before we begin, there are a few housekeeping items we'd like to go through. Everyone on the call today is muted. However, there will be opportunities to submit questions. To do so, please type your questions into the question bar on the Zoom side panel, and we'll read them out to you at the end. Please try to keep your questions as concise and clear as possible. And while we are going to try to get to as many viewer questions as possible, unfortunately, we may not get to everyone. And if you have an outstanding question following the webinar or questions are quite personal in nature, please contact us at support@Dying with Dignity Canada, and we will follow up with you individually. We will also be sending out a post-webinar survey that will pop up at your screen after the webinar, and it will give you the opportunity to share your feedback. This session is also being recorded, so you will be able to watch it again later. So there's no need to take notes if you don't want to. And so now I want to introduce today's speakers. So first we have Bill Nixon. Bill Nixon is a proud father of two with over 40 years of experience as a licensed funeral director. After his grandfather and uncle passed away in close succession, Bill realized that his family and his community didn't really know how to discuss and process death. Since then, Bill has worked in funerary services from the age of 18, providing comfort to families across Ontario and in British Columbia. Now manager of operations at Turner and Porter, Bill is passionate about supporting families undergoing the grief process and has begun to expand his funeral homes services to accommodate those requesting aid. We also have a second Bill joining us today, Bill Denning. Bill Denning is a fourth-generation funeral director and a celebration of life creator. Bill is proud to serve his small community of Rodney, Ontario, and takes his inspiration from his family and community to make each passing unique and meaningful. Over the past few years, Bill and his team have been asked to help families not only after death, but throughout it by providing a space for May to take place, meeting with and listening to families about what is important to them and incorporating their wishes to create a special experience for all involved. So welcome, Bill and Bill. Thank you for joining us. And I'm now going to pass it over to Kelsey Goforth to get us started.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you, Bill and Bill, for being with us this afternoon. So to get us started, I know we heard a little bit about this in your bios that Melissa just shared, but can you tell us a little bit more about why you decided to become a funeral director, and what about that role and working in that space interests you? Maybe Bill Denning, do you want to get us started with that?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, and hello, everybody. I grew up above the family funeral home, as did my dad and my granddad. So in the early days, if I wanted to hang out with my family, I would go downstairs and hang out in the funeral home. So being around death and dying really was not a big adjustment for me, because it's always been a part of my life and part of my family's life. And as I became a funeral director at the age of 19. I started to work elsewhere in Toronto and London, and then eventually in a little town of 400 people. And I think that's really where there was an ignition for me in connecting with families, because for the first time, you would meet with a family for funeral arrangements, visitation, funeral, working through burial, cremation arrangements, but then you would continuously see them again. You'd see them at the ballpark, you see them at the grocery store. And what always seems to develop is a really deep and meaningful connection with the families that we serve, because we're with them at one of the most difficult times in their lives. And working in small town funeral service, that's probably the part of the job that I love the most, is having these wonderful, lasting relationships with the families that I've served even 20 years later.
Thank you for that. And Bill Nixon, would you like to share a little bit about your decision to get involved?
Absolutely, and thank you for inviting us today. I think it potentially can open a door for end of life processes to involve everyone. So a little bit of what has already been said, I would say the most profound factor, if you will, of why I became a funeral director still holds today. Curiosity and a whole lot of unanswered questions. So back as mentioned, when I was 9 years old, a week apart, my grandfather and uncle died. And in those days, parents, with respect to my deceased parents, not to condemn them now, but the explanation of what happened was extraordinarily brief. Your uncle died, your grandfather died, and then for 9 years old, you were kind of just maneuvered or navigated around. So there's a lot of unanswered questions and a whole lot of curiosity. So 9 years later, I met a funeral director, a friend of my mother's. I went in and he spent about 2 hours with me going over those unanswered questions. And what became obvious is, yes, the template, if you will, of funerals could be similar, but there is no routine. Families are unique. Families bring different things to the funeral home, if you will. They invite you into a time, one of the most intimate times in their lives, and they're asking for help. So it really is a privilege to serve. We never want to be that person or company or individual to add to their grief or burden. We're the cushion between that. That holds true the same. I still have the same curiosity. There are times where we're evolving in funeral service, so there are some answered questions, but we can still be of help. And it truly is an honor to serve.
Thank you for that. I think, what you said that really resonates is how everybody's life is unique. Everybody's personality is unique. We're all very different people from one another. So it makes sense that the end of life experience and how that person is honored is, just as unique and aligned with who they were. So it's great, and who their family is and how they want to be remembered. Thank you for that. So Bill Nixon, can you continue with what does it look like? What's a typical day like for you as a funeral director? What do you do? What are the duties and responsibilities that typically come up in a day for you?
It is unique to, excuse me, every funeral home. So Turner and Porter has 4 locations. So although you're positioned at one location, each day you look at the bigger picture, if you will, of all 4 locations. So there is a component of individual, like you were working in one funeral home, but on a given day, we have staff starting at 6 o'clock in the morning. Those people are starting to clean our buildings and clean our vehicles. The funeral directors start to arrive at just after 7 o'clock, and then depending on the shift could be 8, 9, or 1 o'clock. So what generally happens very briefly is we scope the exterior of the grounds and interior. Are there anything been compromised? We look at the rooms. Has there been a flood overnight or something spilled or anything like that? We check the remains that are in the rooms for visitation, as well as those remains that will be going to crematoriums. So our staff starts out by reviewing the day. Has there been any changes? Has anything deterred from the plan from yesterday? when the plan was initiated. If I was to give you a headline of funeral service is be prepared of what is scheduled and be prepared for what isn't scheduled, because, and I'm sure Bill Denning would say the same thing, that we could plan our day to infinite detail, and then the phone rings, and whatever you're involved with at that moment, you have to divert attention, because if it is a family calling about a death, we can't multitask during a call that someone is conveying to us death has occurred. So in multitasking is certainly part of it, but it's really important that, and we do it maybe with our friends and family, kind of multitask, we're doing something and still listening or whatever. But when it comes to dealing with the family, without sounding cliche, there is no second chance to make a first impression. It's vitally important. If you miss something or kind of think what you heard and you're not really paying attention, in 35 seconds, we're establishing trust. And if we're not paying attention, family aren't going to be comfortable with us. So that's always on our plate, if you will. So throughout the day, we're following up with calls that come in overnight, whatever that may be, or emails. We are checking again the sound systems, all the technology now in preparation for visitations and services. And then we're ready to open the door about 8 o'clock. And then depending on the day, whatever services, visitations, or whatever, all staff we kind of have a huddle again. We huddle, if you will, before each service or visitation. So no family ever feels like if they talk to 3 different staff, they don't have to repeat themselves of, we don't know what they're talking about. Everyone has an understanding of the families we're serving. So no one ever feels that we got to repeat ourselves again because no one's talking. Does that kind of give you a...
No, that's
I
great.
can talk cars if you want, but that's not exciting, really.
No, that's great, Bill. Thank you. And I think it sounds very family-centered, right? Keeping the person and their experience at the center of what you're doing and trying to make a difficult time as comfortable and, keeping that family feeling as held as you can during, some very emotional times in their life. So thank you. Thank you for that. Bill Denning, anything you want to add to what Bill shared? Anything else that comes to mind?
Well, Bill's done a great job kind of pulling back the curtain a little bit on the on the workings of funeral service, the things that folks don't see, so that everything appears very seamless on the front end. And he's right, it's all about triage. You have a great plan at the beginning of the day, and then you got to change it 8 times based on what's going on. But I could give you sort of a scenario of what some of my days look like. And occasionally my day will begin by having to make my way into the city or to a hospital, to a nursing home to pick up somebody who has passed away. And every scenario is different, but if I was making my way, let's say, into a residential hospice, typically the family is going to be there waiting for us to arrive. So we have to go quite swiftly. And at that crucial moment, make our introductions if we don't know each other already, and explain to them how the transition of care is going to take place, what we're going to be doing, how we're going to be helping them, and assure them that we are going to take great care and respect of this person that they've just lost, so that they know that the person that means so much to them is in good hands. And from there, bringing that person who's passed away back to the funeral home and making a plan with the family to meet at some point to work our way through the details, the arrangements, and how they want the next few days to unfold. Obviously, there's different ways that folks choose to inter, to cremate their loved ones. Receptions, celebrations of life, visitations, funerals. Every family is different. As we have those conversations and try to really flesh out during those chats what was important about that person, what made them special and what made them unique, so that if we are helping them with some sort of ceremony, we can then use our creativity to help them make that ceremony reflective of the person who's passed away. Sometimes if there's going to be a viewing, then I may have to take the tie off and head to the back room and conduct the embalming, which is a a procedure that essentially provides families with the gift of time. And that's all it is. We've got families nowadays that are so spread out across the world. Even if they're not doing like a traditional burial, it's important to some families to be able to come and see that person before the burial or the cremation takes place. So the embalming is essentially just a temporary preservation so that when the family can come together to say goodbye, that they can do so in a way that's positive as opposed to negative. And by negative, I mean that when we die, Mother Nature does what she does, and our bodies begin to break down with signs of discoloration, with odor, and things that aren't necessarily helpful to those who are having the worst moment of their lives. So we will do that. And as funeral directors, Bill and I are licensed to perform that procedure, as well as to work our way through funeral arrangements with a family and negotiate a contract for services, conduct funerals, conduct visitations. There can be some follow-up paperwork at the end of the day with a family where I'm helping them to navigate Canada Pension death benefit applications and canceling health cards and driver's licenses and passports and jury duty lists and Elections Canada, Elections Ontario. There's a bunch of different stuff that has to get dealt with when somebody passes away, and most funeral providers assist families with that. So the best part of my day is engaging with families, meeting them, whether it's at the place of death or during the arrangement or helping them create meaningful ceremony. The worst part of my day is paperwork. Every family is different. And fortunately, most times what we are doing is helping families say goodbye to somebody who has lived a long, wonderful life. Those are the good days. If I'm burying somebody who's 95 years old and has a wonderful family that has come together to say goodbye, it's really kind of hard to feel bad. It's the difficult moments are the ones where death has happened before a person's full story could really be told, when they've died young or died suddenly. And of course, it takes a different kind of approach from the funeral service with those families. We have to be so very careful that we help them come to terms with this loss in a way that's going to be helpful and gentle, and make the worst day of their lives perhaps a little bit better by just being a good person who's sitting not across from them, telling them what to do, but sitting beside them, helping guide them into making decisions that make sense for their family.
Thank you for that. I think some of your answers sort of leads into our next question, which is about the roles of funeral homes in end of life. And it sounds like there's a bit of everything. There's the emotional and creating the ceremony and providing that support to grieving families. There's the logistical paperwork stuff that nobody really wants to think about when they've just experienced a significant loss, but providing the clarity to move through those checklists of things that need to happen. Is there anything, Bill Nixon, that you would add to that when it comes to what you think the role is of funeral homes for end of life?
After I guess close to 40 years now, I would say the one thing that is consistent is, regardless of how funeral service evolves, whether, as an example of 30 years ago there were 2 days visiting and the service the third day, and that has evolved, if you will. If I was to give you a headline of my experience or the profession I'm in, is we've navigated through it. We certainly guide families. To Bill's point, we meet with families. There is no template, if you will. Life is unique. A life is unique, and that's what we try to help families celebrate. For the end of life process, I would go back to the navigation part of it, is that funeral homes have always navigated to where they could be of service, not stick their nose in where it doesn't belong or anything like that, but how can we help? So 5 years ago, I was going to say 10, but 5 years ago or 2 years ago, when we'd be sitting here talking about having made in a funeral home, I wouldn't have seen it happening, because we have a building for a purpose, and we've adapted. It is, from a funeral director's point of view, a funeral home. We adapt on how we can be helpful. Hopefully, like something today is a catalyst to go further with that, with organizations that are more involved with the process of end of life, how we can make the process, the entire process, seamless. So we're not on each other's plate or anything like that, that we know what we have an understanding of which each person or organization is doing. And maybe we can intertwine it all, that it is a simplistic process that guides people through it. So we navigate with funeral homes. We've navigated, to Bill's point of the evolution and how we are now have greater roles, have greater resources to help people celebrate a life. It's just not a picture on a table. It's bringing kind of a full circle to one extent, that my great-grandparents and some of yours will have told stories, or if you've heard stories, everything was done in the home. Then it was taken out of the home. When it was in the home, it was a family event. When it was out of the home, we had trouble talking to kids about it. Now we're going full circle again, that a little bit different, that the funeral home is the family home for a few days. So to the end of life process, maybe this is a catalyst to how we can all engage, work together, and make the process less stressful and an easy flow for people.
Thanks, Phil. And I think that historical context is very interesting as well. And it seems that there are folks nowadays wanting to be more hands-on with the end-of-life process, and wanting to incorporate different end-of-life rituals that maybe we used to do many years ago, and we kind of moved away from. So that's great that you raised that. And you also mentioned MAID, which ties to the next set of questions that we're going to get into in a moment. But before we do, I'm wondering if we can talk through misconceptions. What are the common misconceptions that people have about funeral homes and the offerings of funeral homes? Is that something that Bill Nixon, do you maybe want to start and talk to that?
Working in a metropolitan city, Toronto, it may be relevant all over, but one of the things that has, I would say, that has been consistent, misconceptions. This is a career, a profession that, just like any career or profession, people are in it for particular reasons. I would say one thing that has been consistent through the years, maybe evolving a little bit, changing a little bit, but one of the things, the misconceptions I've seen over the years is funeral homes are put in the same category, if you will, of other businesses. And what I'm talking about is, as an example, we offer various programs, estate planning. We bring a lawyer in free of charge. We talk about advanced planning. Some people look at it as, so what's our motive? And I think Bill would agree, Bill Denning would agree, similarly, that for Turner and Porter, we have the privilege of serving over 2,300 families a year. We have some information. And it can be, we could almost say it's self-serving in this context. We've seen that things that could happen, that with estates, and we offer information free of charge, because the self-serving part is, we don't want you to go through it, and we don't want to go through it either. Because in today's world, unfortunately, family relationships maybe aren't as friendly as they once were, and raw emotion, etc. So one of the things is, there is no motive. We genuinely want to help. We bring in these experts of law. We have grief programs. We have various programs that it's free because we want to help. You don't have to give us anything. You don't have to pre-plan with us, but it is important to pre-plan. So yes, Turner and Porter would like to serve every single family in Toronto. That's just not going to happen. But what we do want to do is help every single family that we can. And that alone, just saying it like that, people, well, what's in it for us? Because it helps people. And in return, it may help us or any other funeral director that you can avoid maybe legalities. You have the information before you going in, because in your field, end of life, anything is, it's not the greatest time to make the decisions about end of life at end of life. So we can talk about it. There's no harm in talking about it. There's no harm in with our offerings of, honestly, it's free because we want you to have it, because it will help everyone. It's a win-win situation. So that certainly alone, and then the every so often, thankfully, Marketplace or someone will come out with a video of there are some bad seeds in every profession and every industry, and too bad for us, we all get brushed with the same misconceptions, if you will. There is no harm in shopping funeral homes. Better to do it in advance than at the time. We are a profession that want to help. We are a profession that wasn't really until the last 10, 15 years that we became more of a business, just because of competition and a variety of things, that there are still funeral homes that put service first. I hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, speaking about the offerings that you provide to folks, whether or not they're going to, use your services in terms of, using your services as a funeral home for somebody who dies, I think funeral directors, I'm just looking at parallels here. Our organization, we're very comfortable talking about death and dying. Not everybody is, right? It's something that I think generally society doesn't want to talk about until they absolutely have to. And like you said, that's going to lead to a lot of stress. So I think organizations and people who are interested in having those conversations and comfortable with it sort of feel a calling to continue to do that, because they see the consequences when you don't, and it's a bit of a struggle and emotionally more difficult and that sort of thing. So absolutely appreciate you sharing that. Bill Denning, anything you wanted to add to that discussion?
I can think of three pretty common misconceptions. So the first one is that you have to prepay if you're pre-planning, and that's not the case. Many folks will choose to come in and have those conversations with us ahead of time and give us the directions so that their families do not have to guess at what mom or dad might have wanted at a very emotional time. Some people choose to fund those decisions ahead of time. Other people have insurance policies in place. So having that conversation with your favorite friendly undertaker ahead of time is a great thing to do, and it doesn't cost you anything. So that's number one. Number two would be folks who have signed their donor card, Trillium Gift of Life. Even if you have signed your donor card, you can still have a viewing, like a family can still come together and say goodbye to that person, even if organs have been harvested. Funeral directors, as part of the embalming process, can make a person presentable in a way that's positive. And the third one is that even if a family chooses cremation, which is a very popular choice these days, more than half of us are choosing cremation, you can still have your family come in and have a farewell before the cremation takes place. We have many families that choose to just come in super casual in their jeans and t-shirts, and mom or dad or brother or sister, the person who's passed away, is placed into a cremation-friendly casket made of pine or poplar. They all come in, we have the person's favorite music playing, we pull out the Sharpie markers, and everybody can sign the cremation container and have a very casual, comfortable, family-centered goodbye. So there's many different things that can be done regardless of the choice of disposition. And funeral service, funeral directors, as they sit with families and make arrangements, they're constantly asking a lot of questions so that we can hear from the family what it was that was important, so that we can then in turn provide ideas and suggestions to them as to ways to make that send-off meaningful.
Thanks for that, Bill. Those are great points and really good information to keep in mind. So we're going to move ahead to MAID. I know a lot of our folks on the call today are probably very interested in hearing about that. And in your intros, when Melissa introduced you, she mentioned your involvement with MAID and support for MAID and trying to help families through that experience as well. So the first question is, if other funeral directors, and hopefully there's some of you on our call today, are interested in giving people space to have MAID in their funeral home, what would you tell them about the experience? Bill Denning, do you want to get us started with that?
Sure. Well, I think that for families who have selected MAID, really what we as funeral providers are offering is just simply an extension of the things that we already do. Having the difficult conversations, helping them navigate how to do things in a way that's respectful and reflective of their family. I would say to other funeral providers that are contemplating to serve families in this capacity that a business such as funeral service does not make distinctions as to who they serve. We, as Bill noted, are very happy and proud to serve as many families as we can. So it's really not up to us to decide how a family wants to end life or how they want to celebrate life. We're just simply there to use the tools that we have to help them make it meaningful. And from the perspective of offering services to families that have selected MAID, I'm sure we're going to dive into this a little more, but having that procedure take place at the funeral home allows us to create ceremony around that procedure. And funeral service is already really well set up to provide that. We have the facilities, we have the sound systems, we have the creative, talented people that day in and day out create meaningful ceremony. And I know from my perspective, I've had a number of families now that have chosen to come to the funeral home for the MAID procedure. And we've been able to provide our services without really a large investment otherwise of infrastructure and resources that we already have, because we are ceremonialists. This is what we do. And we have buildings that are well appointed for families to come in who are grieving. So if I was to say anything to other funeral service providers, it's not a large step into accommodating this new perspective.
Thank you. Bill Nixon, anything to add?
What started, this is back in 2020, we evaluated from time to time. So we obviously greet people at our front doors, and there are times that there is a sensitivity of what we should be aware of the cause of death. Someone died of a heart attack, someone ended their life by suicide, car accident, whatever. It is important to know so we don't say anything inappropriate. How long has the person been sick or whatever? From that, we've been hearing more and more. Before any real involvement with funeral homes, MAID was becoming more common in our day-to-day. We had been in contact with a doctor that who is actively involved with MAID, and during COVID, we had a Zoom presentation for staff for the doctor to walk us through, as if the 35 people on the Zoom call were one person. The doctor walked us through the process, what led up to where you're filling out forms or whatever. But what the doctor did that was an integral part of our education was, and she did a magnificent job on, she had us in the room. She walked us through what a patient was doing, what they do, just walked us through as if we were the patient. We had 35 people in the room. It was from that gave us a greater education, a greater look into MAID, and to Bill's point, and going back again of, it wasn't a stretch. So we navigated that. Every single day we are contacted by families that are inviting us into one of the most intimate part of their lives, saying goodbye to someone. So when we see them on normal occasions, normal in the sense that death has occurred, they could have been at bedside at the hospital or whatever, but with MAID, now we're involved in the step before. Now we're in the room, if you will. And it really is we are at a place where we wouldn't normally have been. And it really gives us a greater connect with that family, and further on to what the other bill was referring to, of how much we can be when we are in that such an environment with a family, to be involved and to guide them better because we're in the room.
Thank you for that. And Bill, you touched on this, how, it MAID became more talked about, and more people know somebody who has experienced MAID, maybe in their own, families or friend circles. So as MAID becomes a topic that people might be more comfortable with or more aware of, do you see the role of funeral homes shifting? Do you think more funeral homes might become comfortable with not only being aware of what the process looks like and what people have experienced to have MAID, but also maybe allowing MAID to take place within their buildings? Bill Denning, any comments on that?
Like everything else, there's going to be funeral service providers that are progressive and embracing of change, and then there's going to be a whole lot that are hesitant. But at the end of the day, the families that we serve dictate how we serve them. So if more and more families are asking for this service, it's going to become something that more and more funeral service providers are going to have to consider. And honestly, if I can think of the one thing that funeral service brings to families that are going through the MAID process, it's that we are really, really good at sitting and having normal conversations with grieving families at abnormal times. So the MAID procedures that I've been a part of, I think that what our staff has been able to offer is normalcy, just sitting and having conversations, because families who come in, they're anxious, they're nervous, they're wondering if they're being judged, all of these feelings. And I think that really quickly they realize that the funeral service staff, they're just there to be with them and support them and walk alongside them and have good, real, meaningful conversation to make them feel more comfortable. And again, that's nothing new. That's what we do on a day-to-day basis. And so it's why I think that my experiences thus far with MAID have been not only a positive for the families, but incredibly rewarding for me to be a part of that family's journey. So I do believe that more and more funeral service providers across Canada will begin to see that is something that will be an important service for them to offer. And like so many other changes over the years, when cremation started to get really popular in the 80s, there was a lot of funeral providers that were cautious about offering that service because they thought that maybe it would sour their traditional business, or that the certain faith groups in the community would not appreciate the fact that they were supporting an alternative disposition. There was funeral service providers in the last 10 years that were hesitant to employ in-house celebrants to conduct ceremony for fear of inciting the religious organizations in their community, like from taking away their work. And again, the idea of hosting a MAID family at the funeral home one cannot deny that there's, even for myself, when I first decided to support this and help families, will there be organizations or faith-based organizations that will not be happy with me choosing to support families in this way? And would that have an impact on my business? And personally, I felt that it really wasn't a concern that was worth giving much thought to. And I'll put it from this perspective. And I've had a conversation with a faith-based leader about this. If I was serving a family and it was discovered that that family, somebody in the family had an abortion, would I deny them service because of my concerns with a faith-based organization and how they would feel, or my own personal thoughts? Or if I was to serve a family that had somebody in their family that was a same-sex relationship, we don't make those distinctions. We serve all families the way they want to be served, regardless of who they are. So that's how I justified my my decision to support maid families. And again, I guess that goes back to other funeral service providers questioning whether or not they should offer this or not. That was my rationale.
Thank you, Bill, for that. Bill Nixon, anything to add to that?
It's a bit repetitive, but I would go back to for the funeral organizations that, regardless of why they don't want to or should not and all that, I would certainly invite them to talk to a doctor or an organization such as yours to walk them through, because I believe sometimes, you get bits and pieces of the story and you don't really know what's happening and you form your own opinion. What was vitally important to us and extraordinarily helpful to us was that presentation from the doctor to take us in the room and to see families. And I relate, a colleague had mentioned this to me of, there was one lady being served, going through the maid process, and just asked, is there someone that was coming in by herself? And could someone do her nails? And did her nails, did her makeup, and picked a dress because she brought in a few. A little bit back of what I had originally said, funeral homes are invited into an intimate time, even more intimate than ever before. So to add to that, and a bit repetitive, is before you make a decision, find out what it is. And to Bill's point, the other Bill's point is, there's going to be people that oppose it and they have their personal opinions on it, but it goes back again, rightfully, of what he said. We're not here to judge, we're here to serve.
Thank you so much for that, both of you. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and ask some of the audience questions. So some of these are coming in live. Also, some folks sent in their questions ahead of time when they registered. So we'll try to get through some of these. And if you have more questions, please continue to type them in and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So where to start? We have quite a few here. So so some folks are asking about alternative. I think we think of some of the most common body disposition options as burial and cremation. So this person's asking about some of the alternative methods. So aquamation, green burials. Any thoughts on these methods? Is it something that's coming up more and more in Ontario or in Canada? Is aquamation permitted in Ontario or anywhere else in the country that you know of? Any comments on some of these other options that we're hearing about? Bill Denning, do you want to get us started there?
Sure. So I am a big fan of green burial. I absolutely love this concept. It's in BC already. A dear friend of mine's daughter has been interred in a beautiful green cemetery on Vancouver Island. I mean, essentially the person is placed in a biodegradable casket, whether it's made of wicker or bamboo. They're placed in the ground, covered in wildflowers, marked with a tree, no tombstone. I think it's fantastic, and even lends itself really nicely to what Bill Nixon was talking about, going back to the old days of home funerals. And we're starting to have some folks express some interest in us helping them to facilitate a home viewing and home funeral, a more natural process before ending up at the cemetery. I believe there's a green burial section in Guelph at Woodlawn Cemetery. And as more and more people ask about these things, that's how they evolve. Now, the aquamation, Bill, I don't know a whole lot about it because there's not much of that down my way, but maybe you have some insight on that.
I only know of one location, I'm going to say in Eastern Ontario, that have that option. To be honest, right now, it has not, that subject matter, if you will, has not come up a great deal to investigate, if you will, to get that sort of alternative closer to Toronto. There are some things that, from what we understand, that I don't know if people know all the facts of what happens during that, and I can't fully explain it, but it has just, as it was said, of, yep, there are people are talking about green burials, and I agree, great idea. Same with a number of things, but right now it's hasn't reached the stage, if you will, just yet, to Bill's point that yes, we're aware of it. Yes, people are talking about it, but not enough yet for more cemeteries to provide space. Funeral homes can adapt very easily to the containers, wicker basket, or whatever. We can adapt very quickly, but right at the moment, certainly in the Toronto area that we have found, the demand isn't there yet. Interest, yes, interest is growing, but the demand to actually have it available isn't quite there yet.
Yeah. So alkaline aquamation is also known as alkaline hydrolysis, and using an alkaline chemical and a sealed, pressure sealed vat, the body is immersed, and all semi-solids, all tissue is reduced and neutralized and released to the drain. With what is left, I believe, is bone, which is then reduced into an ash-like substance, so that there is a physical remains for the family that would be not unlike cremated remains. So that's about the extent of what I know about it.
Thank you. We have a couple people chiming in about what's available in their communities. So there's a home in Kingston that does aquamation, and someone else has chimed in that there's a green burial space in Niagara Falls as well. So not super widespread as you said, but we appreciate folks chiming in with and green burial in Picton, Ontario as well. So thank you folks for chiming in with some of what you're seeing in your areas. Just looking at the questions here. So why, just speaking to maid and folks who may choose to have maid in a funeral home, why does that happen? So the folks who have approached you, why was it that they chose to have maid in your space? Bill Nixon, did you want to get started there?
COVID. So what had happened, and this is, I'm going to say 4 years, well before COVID, a few doctors had approached us on the idea of would our funeral home or other funeral homes be interested in helping families with that? Yes, there was not a need, if you will, or an active need. There wasn't a family asking. We were just having a round table about it. And part of it is of, coming into a funeral home, there's the coordinating of things. We're obviously not going to walk through a visitation and all that sort of stuff. So we addressed a number of factors. And then COVID. So home for whatever their private residence was not an option at that particular time. Hospitals weren't allowing anyone in the room, if not even allowing the process to happen. And there was no other place to have made happen. So and we haven't served too many families, but enough, I would say the common denominator has been COVID because of, and Bill would probably can speak better about this, it truly is a family event. And we can navigate, if you will, of sitting around for an hour before a process takes place in a funeral home. It's new, but I would say, and I think Bill has served more families this way, but funeral homes are a comfortable place to begin with, or try to be, and that continues on as far as MAID is concerned. People they don't go in blindly, and it turns out to be like for other purposes, a place of comfort and peace.
Thanks, Bill. Bill D, anything to add to that?
So two additional reasons why we have found ourselves serving families who are choosing MAID. One would be a person is palliative in a faith-based institution, such as a residential hospice or a hospital, and obviously MAID is not an option in those facilities. So we've had folks actually come to us by patient transfer vehicle and be wheeled in on stretcher versus also walking in under their own energy. So that's one of the reasons. Another reason, which is kind of cute in a way, because it's happened a couple times. I've had the individuals who have selected MAID and had the procedure take place at the funeral home say, well, I live in a retirement home and I don't want my nosy neighbors what's going on. So there's the privacy aspect of it as well. If you live in a communal space, and you know, also not just necessarily because you're worried about your neighbors knowing, but because some families are just conscientious of the fact that they don't want to add any undue stress or anxiety on neighbors based on the choices that they've made. So I guess those are a couple other reasons why we've seemed to be serving families in this capacity.
Yeah, I mean, what we have heard most from folks who are looking into other places to potentially have MAID, it's like you said, Bill D, facilities that are opting out of allowing MAID on site is usually the top one. And then the other concern we hear, not quite as much, is folks who might feel uncomfortable with their loved one dying in the home that the spouse or partner or family is going to continue living in. So those are the top two that we usually hear. But I think, Bill Nixon, your observations about COVID and how that's affected things, that's something that did come up at the beginning as well of COVID, concerns about how do I choose between my 3 children, how do I choose which one's going to be with me, and that kind of thing. And luckily there's been movement to accommodate deaths and try to make sure that the full family can be there, but certainly not always possible. So okay, let's move on to a few more here. Somebody has asked, and I feel like this question, and the person who asked, if you want to type additional information if I'm not getting this right, but this person is asking how many death certificates should I ask for? And I'm assuming this is related to like all the paperwork that needs to be done, all the different groups that might need copies of it. Any comments on that, Bill N?
How many proof of death certificates would be relevant to how many accounts you have, banking accounts you have, investments, etc. So generally speaking, many of the banks want hard copy, if you will. To answer your question, we provide for every family 8. Does every family need 8? No. Mostly, 2 or 3, depending on investments or the depth of their financial real estate and all that sort of stuff. So 8 has never been an issue. Some families do come back. There are families that'll last for 30. A little more complex estate, but 8 usually covers it, and most of the time that's more than enough.
Thank you. Bill Denning, is that similar to how you operate as well?
Yeah, Bill Nixon's spot on. I mean, if we give a family 8 proof of death certificates, typically they've got leftover souvenirs, because most funeral providers now have an aftercare program. And that aftercare program I referenced about Canada Pension Death Benefit applications, we meet with a family afterwards and we have them sign all the notifications and death benefit applications, insurance, banks, accountants, we make a list with them of all of the places that they need to provide proof of death certificates to, and then we submit them on their behalf. So a lot of times folks are left not having to do the runaround with the death certificates because we're doing it for them.
Good to know. Bill D, how do you become a funeral director? And my understanding is that there's funeral directors, and then there's funeral directors who also have the ability to do embalming, and that's kind of a complementary credential, but not. Sometimes people do both, and sometimes just one. Is that correct? How does that work?
Becoming a funeral director is the easy part. Staying a funeral director, that's tricky, right, Bill?
Exactly.
So there is a program in Ontario called Funeral Service Education, which is offered at Humber College in Toronto. There is a French-speaking program in Sudbury at L'Oreal, the same program. It's a 1-year in class. It was online, obviously, during COVID, and then a 1-year internship at a funeral service provider, where you will then work with funeral service and do assignments, and then do a practical at the end of the year. If you're wishing to become a fully licensed funeral director who has the capacity to make funeral arrangements, conduct ceremonies, as well as embalm bodies. But they've also got it broken out now so that folks can choose to just do the pre-need side of things. So they can get a license so that they're just meeting with families to discuss pre-planning and negotiate prepaid contracts. And then there's also transfer service operator licenses as well. So that's essentially a funeral director without the ability to conduct ceremony or embalm bodies. Essentially, it gives you a license to sit with families and make funeral arrangements and sign contracts. So depending on what an individual is looking to do in funeral service, there's many different ways to go. But from a manager's perspective or an owner's perspective, it's much more enticing to me to look for a fully licensed funeral director who I can then work with to find that place that they are most happy, whether that's the embalming part or the pre-arranging part, but then have the ability to move them over to other areas when we get really busy. If somebody comes to me and all they have is a pre-planning license, then that's a very specific role that I may not have a full-time position for. Maybe a little different in Toronto where Bill is, where you can do that. But from my perspective, the licensing of a person to do all of the things, even if you're not crazy about embalming bodies, or even if you're not crazy about meeting with families, having that full ticket really opens up the opportunity to work in more places.
Thank you. That makes sense, and that's good to know the different programs that are available to people. I assume it's quite similar in different provinces too, the breakdown, or yeah, okay. Bill, you were in BC for a bit. Is it similar there?
That was a couple of years ago, and when I was there, there was no licensing. Oh. So we're talking 30 plus years ago. I know there is a school now, and it's a similar program as Ontario, etc. But at that time, it was no license whatsoever. You were hired as if you were hiring for any position.
Interesting. Okay. So both of you are speaking to people every day who are going to soon experience a death or who have just experienced a death, people who might be dying soon and wanting to pre-plan. How do you support yourselves? Do you feel as though you experience a lot of grief yourselves, even though it's not your family, it's not you dying or experiencing a death of a loved one? Is there any support for funeral directors who are surrounded by so much loss? Bill Nixon, any comments there?
So to answer the quick answer is yes, there is a lot of support. For those, if I was speaking to everyone that is on this webinar today that was interested in going into funeral service, I equate the template of a doctor. I'm not matching up the professions. But if you go to a doctor, you have a problem, you have a pain or whatever it may be, and you go to the doctor for a solution. If the doctor becomes emotionally involved, the doctor's judgment may be altered because there's an emotional attachment that's greater than empathy and sympathy. So from a funeral director point of view and I would certainly say it's not easy, because in our world every day, there is no happy ending, if you will. I go back early in my career, and I'm not making it sound easy or anything like that, but back in my early 20s, I recall being involved with a family that tragically their 2-year-old son had died. At that time, my son was 2 years old. I could have very easily fallen into the mindset of, this could be me. I didn't. I'm not saying it was easy, but I took on the path of, it's not me, but I have a 2-year-old son and I'm a funeral director, and I can help you, hopefully help the person or help the family, because I was dealing with the father primarily, help them in a way that perhaps is unique. So to answer your question is, yes, there is a fine line that you can fall into. I'm not talking about you can't be empathetic to families. There it is. We've heard many, and we haven't heard them all yet, sad stories. So we want to help, but it's staying on this side of the line that we can show care, support, empathy, without crossing that line to become a burden to a family, to become a burden to ourselves, if you will. But there is help out there within the profession and through local employment assistant programs. I would say one of the greatest sources of help would be talking to colleagues. What have you done in this situation, or how do you deal with this? If it goes beyond that, there certainly is help, but there are many people in our profession that have gone through their career that can be of help to people just joining.
Thank you for that, Bill. Bill Denning, anything you'd like to add?
We have professional associations that have certainly gotten really good at recognizing the challenges of funeral service and created really great support resources for our peers to be able to learn a little bit about coping skills and managing that grief that transcends to us naturally. I find personally that I'm very lucky in the sense that I'm a naturally optimistic person, and that really seems to help me. But when we're dealing with a difficult situation, when what Bill mentioned there about a 2-year-old, and I had a 4.5-month-year-old beautiful little girl pass away in my community about 4 months ago, and it was very sudden. It was not expected, and it was obviously terrible. It was OPP, victim services at the home, going into the home and having to take this little girl away from her parents to the hospital for autopsy. And I had an experience like that early in my career that really, really haunted me for a long time. And this time around, it was a very similar scenario. But I think that as I've aged and experienced funeral service for many years, I've learned how to cope with these sorts of situations in a more positive way. And what I did was I put myself into helping this family come through this incredibly difficult time with a lot of attention, a lot of passion, and a lot of creativity. As I was carrying her out from the house, I said to the dad, I asked him if there was a special song that he used to sing or play to her. And really quickly, he mentioned that from the day she was born, he would sing Wildflowers by Tom Petty. So I found it on iTunes on my phone. I Bluetoothed it, and this little girl and I listened to Wildflowers all the way into London. And to the point where we got just about to the hospital, and it was May, and the wildflowers were all in bloom. So I pulled over and picked some wildflowers, placed them all around her, and then snapped a photo and sent that to mom and dad, and then just carried on my way, just thinking that, I felt like that was the right thing to do. And the dad told me a few days later at the funeral that it was the only good thing on the most terrible day of his life. And that, for me, helped me to heal from that incredibly difficult moment in my life, knowing that I was helping somebody move through grief in a way that was helpful. So, and Bill can attest to this. Like when I first started in the business, if I pulled over on my way to the hospital to bring somebody in for an autopsy, pick wildflowers, I would have been fired. But we're constantly encouraging our team of funeral professionals to use their creativity to help families make these moments special, meaningful, and maybe just a little bit better. And we were trained to not really do that. But as society has changed, expectations have changed, funeral service has also been able to evolve and change and really put those extra special touches on those difficult days, because we have seen over the years the things that work really well for families and the things that don't. So again, going to a funeral professional, not only are you getting somebody who's moving a dead person from A to B, but a person who's helping that family transition from a physical relationship to a spiritual relationship in a positive way.
Thank you, Bill, for sharing that. And that such a sad and beautiful example of going above and beyond. Really, you didn't need to do that. You were, hired, and your role was to transport this little girl's body. But like you said, doing what feels right and what feels appropriate, and making that terrible day a little bit better, knowing that this family's child was in good hands with somebody who cared and saw her and saw her family's experience with such detail. Thank you for sharing that. It's really, really lovely to hear. And as we're approaching, we're after 4 o'clock Eastern here. I think we will end on that note and Bill's beautiful story. Thank you both so much for being with us this afternoon. It's been so wonderful for the information, the hearing about your experiences, hearing about how you're supporting people in your communities with MAID and not with, with other deaths as well. It's really great to get your perspectives, and we're so grateful for everything that you're doing in your communities and all that you contributed to the discussion today. For our folks on the call, if there's something that we didn't get to today, feel free to email us, and we'll see if we can connect you with some answers. We're also having the survey pop up on your screen when we wrap up, so if you could take a moment or two to fill that out, that would be great. I also just wanted to read a comment that just came through and then just disappeared. Let me pull that up again. This person says, "Thank you, Bill and Bill. That was enlightening and strangely comforting." And I think that that's great to hear as well, that people were comforted by this discussion and can walk away with some additional information. So we will wrap up there. We have a webinar next week about MAID and death and dying in Ontario. We have 2 MAID providers joining us, so do check out our website and register for that if you haven't already. And Bill, thanks again for everything. So glad that you could join us, and have a wonderful afternoon, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye now.